Hello, it's 8 o'clock. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of August 2023. And hopefully, if everything's working, you're hearing me. And if you're not, well, that means I've got to fiddle with things again. So let's see what's happening. Ah, that's interesting. Takes a little while even for it to start. So I've got to turn the sound down on there as is normal. Takes a little while even for it to start. And do that. At least I know this. Right, good. Hello, welcome, Amersham, UK, 8 o'clock at night. And I was going to say the sun's still shining, but we haven't had sun all day today, really. We've had rain, we've had lots of rain, and we've had hardly any rain, but we haven't had any sun, so not enough to... Well, if it did, I missed it. I must have blinked. Anyway, good evening. How you doing, people? And I shall type in here, because I know people like to see I am really here. It is not a recording. I could do that, but I haven't. Right, okay, so if anybody would like to say, announce themselves, it'd be nice. For watching now, start streaming 72 seconds ago. I know one of them watching is me. Oh, my it's happening screen isn't happening yet, but it will be eventually, I guess. I don't know. I've no idea how these things work, because every time I change something, it's different. So I just won't worry about it. Ah, Steve, hello. Yes, Stephen, yes. We have the sun, rain, and both at the same time too. So you're in Northern Europe, aren't you? So I guess, because the UK, interestingly enough, I saw this on a programme once, the UK is on the cross point of 4 weather systems. We got 2 from the south and 2 from the north. That's the southeast, just like on the compass. And they fight each other, which is why we get the same weather either as Normandy or as Belgium, depending on whether it's the northern one or the southern one that wins. And we get the same weather as, well, and it's affected by whatever's happening in America and South America. So, it makes a real mess of the whole weather system, which is, of course, why England is the green and pleasant land, otherwise known as, oh my God, it might be summer, it might not be. Because, what was it, 2020? Anybody remember 2020? Interesting year. Not a lot happened, actually, although an awful lot happened, but not a lot happened. Yeah, I had 2 months off, which was quite nice. Didn't have to drive my bus for 2 months. And then we were out and about, and there was loads of people on furlough, and they was enjoying the weather, because we had good weather in the Northern Europe for that year. And so there was lots of complaints about people who were on furlough sitting on the beach. I mean, if they're on furlough, why can't they sit on the beach? But it's just the sort of thing that people moan about. But yeah, it was quite interesting. That was nice weather. 2021 wasn't so bad. Last year was a bit naff, and this year's awful. So yeah, not good at all. And according to the weather forecasts today, July was the wettest we've had for years, and and August is going to be equally bad. Now that's an interesting comment there, Stephen. It was the happiest time of my life. What, the 2020? So expand slightly, sir, so I can not put my foot in it. I was saying to a guy today who hasn't really driven much since 2020, because he was being unwell, and but he was saying that he thought that driving standards today aren't as good as they used to be. And I can tell you, in the UK at least, furlough during yes, that was a good time, wasn't it? I had the same. We went January, February, March, April. I think I had May, June, and July. I had. Well, no, May and June. May and June. I had. Good evening, Kelvin. How are you doing? It's we're just discussing the weather. Well, it's a British channel. What else do you expect us to talk about? We could talk about hi-fi, I suppose, but maybe the weather's more important. It certainly has more effect on a lot of things. Yeah, Stephen was just saying that he enjoyed the spring of 2020 on furlough. Buses kept driving, but I was car mechanic then and had March and April. Yeah. Now, interestingly, I won't name names because I used to work for a bus company that is international now, and they had the thing during the furlough where actually a guy got sacked because of furlough. Now, this is an interesting cause and effect thing for you. We had a load of rubbishy buses, and they were always saying we can't fix them because we haven't got time because they've got to be on the road. So unless it's a PG9, which is a total prohibition, you must not drive it. It's going to be back on the road, and we'll fix the minor things later. Well, what happens with that mentality, of course, is that it's like the potholes in the road. You end up with lots and lots of minor things. So the whole thing is now a disaster, and the sum of the parts and all that. Anyway, we went into lockdown, and they parked up all the buses except for about 10. So they've got about 60 buses parked up. They mothballed them, and when they came back, when they called us back 2 months later, they found that most of the buses wouldn't start. The engineering department didn't actually take the opportunity where there was 2 months of the majority of our buses not being on the road to repair them, because they were perfectly entitled. They had a working workshop. They could have. They didn't furlough many of the engineering staff because obviously they were needed because they had shifts and they were understaffed anyway. But yeah, quite literally, I got back, I think, beginning of the month. So they said, okay, all you guys come back now because life's getting more interesting. And we said, well, where's the engineering manager? Oh, he's been sent on his way, sort of thing, was what they said. Well, why is that then? Because the buses still don't work, and we couldn't get half of them on the road the first day, which was the day before. Because I went back on the sort of like the Monday or the Tuesday. I think it's the way I was rotated. And the previous day, most of the buses hadn't worked, hadn't started. They hadn't done anything to prepare for it. So they were really quite silly about that. Anyway, what we've got there? Rubbish weather and knackered back, says Kelvin. And worked through lockdowns. Train work is the key worker. Train work is key worker apparently, yes. Even though they were empty most of the time, as were the buses. It's great fun when you drive a bus that's normally packed, sort of like from High Wycombe to Reading, which is a good hour plus drive, and normally you're sort of pushing it to try and get through on time, and then you get about a third of the way there and you have to sit on a bus stop for 5 minutes. Then you go down the road and you have to sit on another bus stop for a few minutes. And a lot of bus stops aren't in places where you can sit on them, to be honest. I mean, you can drop somebody off, but if you're running a couple of minutes early and it's the next but one bus stop is the timing point, you don't want to get there early, so you've got to stop at the one before the timing point. Steve knows what I'm on about. And at that point, that's when life gets quite fun. But having said that, there weren't many cars on the road except for the ones that were being driven by yobs. Stick in whatever you describe as a yob, but normally in a slightly souped up car or a Vauxhall, one of those little Nova things, and invariably driving on the wrong side of the road at 2 or 3 times the speed limit and not stopping at road junctions. They were all over the place. It was terrible. Anyway, Right, Kelvin, worked through the lockdowns, train work apparently. Yeah, Kelvin says, don't think the railway is different. We had plenty of opportunity to fix all the minor faults, but the grown-ups decided otherwise. We're still trying to mop up 2-year-old work orders. Yeah. Steve says it's the same all over, and they say I'll keep going. I don't like the place, but I drive slower, obviously. I'll try and keep it under 2 minutes. Yeah, we were no more than 2 minutes earlier, 5 minutes late was what was considered to be a reasonable thing. But you weren't allowed to arrive more than 2 minutes early, but you weren't allowed to leave early. And we had some really big troubles when they introduced GPS on the ticket machines, because the technology was great, but it was only accurate with 30 yards. And what used to quite often happen is you'd pull up at the bus stop, and it would say, "Yeah, you're there," but you were 10, 15 feet from the actual flag, and that's where the people are standing. But you pulled up because of the traffic in front, and then you'd edge forward, and as you got to the flag, it'd say, "Oh, you're going then." And it would flag you as having left, which, because you were now on time, but you had a 5-minute loading time, was a bit of a problem. I had a few disagreements with people that didn't understand on things like that. But then you're not surprised, are you? I wouldn't have thought so. And, just whilst we're on it, there's only one of these lives that the chat got lost. If I edit a live, not during it, but obviously if I cut something off like a tail end or a beginning that sort of went a bit skew with, it loses the chat, which is one of the reasons why I read it out. The other reason I read it out is because that way I make sure I see it and you know that I've seen it. And the other reason I read it out is because this goes on to podcasts. And by definition, a podcast shouldn't necessarily be visible, although obviously YouTube podcasts are visible. But they are targeting people that are intending to listen rather than watch. So that's the other reason I read the thing. But it does mean that the chat isn't necessarily there like straight away. I don't know how long the processing takes, but I know Calvin tried watching it once, and it wasn't there sort of like the next morning. And I know I've also tried checking it at about 4 hours after we've done the live, and it's been there. So it seems to vary depending on how busy YouTube are. But I've only lost one chat, and that was because I trimmed a really awful start. I mean, today's start was fairly smooth. The fact that, just so that you guys are aware why it's a bit of a mess to start with, I started chatting. I'd hit all the right buttons, I thought, but I knew when I hit the one, which I did hit, and it took the delay that you guys get between me speaking and it coming up is actually bigger than. So I'd started speaking and I'd got about 4 or 5 words out, and then it came on my monitoring of it, and so the first 4 words were missing. Just so you know, it's just one of those things. It's the wonderful world of digital. And talking about that, if you saw the video I've put up, I know Kelvin has, the one about just turn the knobs. The trouble I had with that, one of the softwares, this is one of the reasons why people don't necessarily like digital internet connection stuff. One of the softwares I use, which is I'll tell you, I'm not paid by it. It cost me an arm and a leg, but I use the enhancement software, which is can't remember the name of it now. Is that stupid, eh? Topaz. Yes, I do. I can remember now. Topaz. And so what I do with that is I use that to, if I've got any video that's gone a bit sort of silly, I will use that to bring it in, stabilise it, make it look properly defined or whatever. occasionally you get a messy video, or if I'm pulling something off from somewhere, because I don't only make videos for myself, I also do them for some other people. And so Topaz had decided they were going to do an update, and as is normally their updates are pretty good, but twice they've done this to me now. They this one is not actually there's a flag that you have to tick if it's important on them, and the software I use it's important. If you don't tick this flag, it will corrupt your software. So I didn't know that this flag needed doing, because I haven't needed to do it for the last 6 months, and the update had turned it off. So I did a bit in the video, and it corrupted, and then I couldn't get it to render, and I couldn't get it to output, I couldn't get it to do anything. And I'd gone to Topaz about it, and they sort of said, oh well, maybe it's this. So I managed to get the rest of the thing done, but it was a real pain in the backside. And as I said in my community post, digital is not friendly. Have you ever tried? Do you remember DVD players? The proper sort of you put them under the telly type DVD players. Well, they used to be almost a linear version of, or an analog version of digital, because they used to take in the digital signal, and they used to take it in, I think, possibly sort of like board by board. DVD players. Oh, hello, Egil. How you doing? All right. DVD players. They used to be very much like CD players. I mean, we all know that if you've got a CD where you can't read the talk, it doesn't work. But the original CD players that you had, if you put in a disc and you had a bit, one of the things we used to do was on a CD. That's a CD. For any of the youngsters around who don't know what a CD is, there's a picture of one. No, not there. Do you know, it's almost impossible to point at your own set. That one. Yeah, that's it. Right, that's a DVD or a CD, and this is a real one. And what we used to do, part of the tracking and everything, because they used to be laser controlled and servo controlled lasers, and they used to just put out basically a digital RF stream, a bit like Nicam television sound. And in order to check the tracking of things, they used to issue discs with dropouts on them, so you'd have a line, very thin line across the disc, and it would taper. And the idea was that you could tell by what track it was playing whether or not the laser was in, the tracking was in specification or not, or the laser. And so you could tell about the error conversion stuff. It was all sort of it sounds advanced, because obviously it's data, and it's you got sum in and all that sort of thing, and error correction. But it didn't say, if this file isn't any good, we won't play it. What it said was, if this file has got a hole in it, we'll fix the hole, and if we can't fix the hole, it will go tick. And we all know about DVDs and things going, or CDs going if they had a really big problem. But most of the small problems weren't a problem. Now, if you've ever we actually had a problem where we were using DVDs as a method of storing CCTV, and it was DVD-R or RW. I think it was quite happy to use both. But sometimes we'd get a problem where the more advanced, we'd take this stuff off the DVD onto the computer. On more than one occasion, I had to record with my camera the DVD playing back on the television, because the DVD reader in the machine, the computer, would not read it. You'd put the disc in and it'd say faulty disc. We'd say, hang on, no, it's just come out. You put it in a DVD player and it'd be fine. Put it in the DVD recorder, it'd be fine. Put it in any of the other analog. Put it in any of those sort of devices where it wasn't really a problem, because they just played it, and it was fine. But when you put it in the computer, which included to be able to edit it, which is what the main reason was for putting it in, the computer used to read it and say, that doesn't add up, error, boom, you can't do it. So because what it was recording was fairly important, it's CCTV, then I had to get a camera and point it at the TV, and I used to have to play the DVD on the DVD player, just a cheap and cheerful DVD player, and record it on my phone, or on actually I had a proper camera, I had a HD camera in the days where HD cameras were rare, and I'd point it at it and it would just work. But it hasn't been, they're not like that now. They're everything's sort of, it's got to be right or it's wrong, and if it's wrong then it's no good. A bit like me, I suppose. Anyway, right, okay, sorry. Let's have a read on a bit more of this. Kelvin, people playing the price of calibration cassettes. The optical meter must have been a lot higher. Yes, it was. But we actually, you could buy, when you were a dealer, because I was a Technics Panasonic repair agent, and obviously you'd buy one thing. This was one of the things that people, if you'll know what I mean when I say about this, Kelvin, if you go on a certain favourite Facebook group of mine, you get these people who are being so absolutist and ridiculous about stuff, certain Scandinavians and whatever. What used to happen was you'd get the Panasonic service kit for a particular model, which they would do at a really really cheap price, because it almost came as part of the when you signed up to buy and sell that equipment, they gave you, sort of chucked you in your direction some at cost equipment, and then if you wanted any replacements after that, you had to pay the full price. Well, so you've got a CD, and it's the tracking CD for a Panasonic, what knows, and you've now got a Philips machine come in because you're a general repair agent as well. And actually, I did have a Philips repair account, but I wasn't. I was official, but I wasn't supported by them. I think I could repair stuff and get support, but I couldn't actually put repair stuff through and get guarantee reimbursement for it. I had to put that into a service centre, but they were happy for me to do that. Whereas a normal repair agent, they just tell them no. Well, they'd be unhelpful, to say the least. Anyway, so you'd get yourself your Panasonic disc, which would be round, because that's what discs are, and it would have the various signals and things on it, and you'd look at your Philips or your Sanyo or whoever else's equipment that you were fixing, and then you'd read and see what they said about it. And if they said something along the lines of use a disc like the Panasonic one, then you were well away. But if they didn't, if they just explained what you were trying to do and said use their disc, whatever, you then had to try and interpolate what the Panasonic one was telling you to do and find the equivalent parts on the Philips or whatever brand and try and get it to it. I mean, it was easy with the rebadged stuff, although not always the same. You see, Bang & Olufsen and Philips used the same cassette mechanisms, but they had different service things. They did different things when they were maintaining it. They did it in different ways, and sometimes, I think I've said this before, sometimes it was worth phoning up the competitor that used the same mechanism, i.e. phone up Bang & Olufsen and say, here, when your machine does this, what does it mean? Because the Philips that you've got on the bench, you can't get any joy out of Philips, and so maybe they've had the problem at Bang & Olufsen, and the Philips ones just haven't got the word through yet. I had to do that with JVC and Ferguson. Had to do that with Panasonic, was their own stuff mostly, but JVC, Ferguson, Brandt, Baird, any of the radio rental stuff or whatever, if any of that came in, then you were phoning up different manufacturers, because we knew when you took the covers off what the inside was, and that was the way you did it, because we had to get the stuff fixed. And to a certain extent, the manufacturers didn't mind, because they could tell us how good their stuff was because they had different versions, and or they could add to their knowledge of what the problems were, and so it would stop them having problems later on down the line. It's just way it goes. One of the things, I said this before as well, most of the service departments did cooperate with each other, even though the shops were technically at war with each other. The service departments were nice to each other mostly. Egor just got a Philips Concert BI Ampli radio from the 50s. Hasn't been running since 1972. Turned it on and it sounds just fantastic. Wow, you're lucky. That's a lot older than my video recorder that blew up. I'll tell you what, I've said this. You got to take some of these things. Philips normally make lovely sounding equipment. Normally it gives a good picture, or as good as the format will allow. And normally the sound from Philips stuff is good. I've never had an issue with that. And I'll say the same about Grundig. Now, bearing in mind, yes, I did have a Philips account, and I used to repair Philips, and it was always good for the fact that things used to go wrong, and so you knew with Philips that you were onto a bit of a moneymaker. But the equipment actually did sound nice, and it used to be, well, advanced for its time, which was always good. And Grundig was also good. Bang & Olufsen, I'm not going to say much about Bang & Olufsen because it was audiophile stuff, or, well, pretentious audiophile stuff. And so you have to bear in mind that you pay your money and you take your chances. I just happen to have had a few of them apart trying to fix them. But, again, if you get a good one, so much the better. I had a few people moan about televisions like that, though. Sorry. So, yeah, 1972. I'll tell you what you can't really beat. It's the old... now, you see, if you try and buy it now, people like Steve wouldn't necessarily know this brand, but Bush, Murphy... Yeah, being how it looks over how it sounds. They always used to argue that they went with good, stable technology rather than being... But then they were the first to bring out the linear track turntable. Cost an arm and a leg, but it tracked linearly. I remember seeing that at the Hi-Fi exhibition in Olympia when it first came out. And, it was impressive. Very impressive. The thing about Bang & Olufsen is it's a bit like a Rolls Royce. You pay your money, you take your chances. A Rolls Royce is basically a nice car, or used to be in the old days before they got taken over by BMW, or is it Volkswagen? It's one or the other. I know Bentley's owned by one and Rolls was owned by the other. But in the old days when it was a company, the engines they used were V8s from America. Okay, they were built to their spec and they were, honed and machined and all the rest of it. But they were still, basically tried and trusted technology from a company that was used to making it, the American engine companies. But then just a bit of finesse added. But people who've had Rolls Royces, they don't tend to have much problem with them. But they're not state of the art in terms of engineering prowess for the engines. But I heard somewhere the other day that there were 32 different tests that Bentley do in the cars for noise and all this sort of thing. So they put a lot of effort into it. Right, so Kelvin says, some are good, yeah. And he says, Techmoan may have something new about linear track turntables. Ah. Have you been watching his previews? So you know what's occurring. Because he did that Sharp one, which was very good. But then, you see, linear track turntables. Bang & Olufsen invented it, or were one of the first to bring it to market. And Amstrad had one. Now, you got to wonder. We had a linear... Stephen says, we had a linear track turntable since 1984. Yeah, I mean, Sharp did them, and they were very good. I don't know about audiophile quality, but they sounded nice to me. I had... that was the only one I had. Speakers on that was superb. That's one of the ones that Techmoan did do a test on. the Mitsubishi did one. I don't know if, well, so okay, Philips has done one. Still works as far as I know. Yeah. Well, like I say, the thing with Philips, I mean, if you had an old Philips colour TV, the electronics would last for years. It's just batteries would die, but they put the batteries in on purpose. I don't know. Anyway, so that's that. What I was going to say was let's move on from there and see if we can discuss anything. I'm going to click that button. Yay, 3 likes. How many we've got watching? 4. That's me included. I did look, just to prove it, I will show you what I did. Let me just bring something up. Boom, 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 and hit that button. Cut. Yay! Look, I've been doing notes so that I can remember what things are rather than having to go off and find them. So yeah, I'm trying to get it better. It's very trying. Yes, I know. Right, back to me. Boom. Hello, I'm back. Right, okay. Normal bit we normally cover for a couple of minutes. V Westlife multi-turntable. Yeah. V Westlife did a multi-turntable music centre review, which I was quite impressed with. Actually, he was quite impressed with it. He said it's good, except for the fact that it's not. It's got a CD recorder in it, and it's got a tape player, and it's got a turntable, and it's got a good FM radio. But he said it's well, you'll have to watch it to find out what the butt is, because I don't want to give away he's only just had it. Oh, mind, he's had many thousands of views by now, because it went up about this time yesterday evening, as far as we're concerned. Techmoan. Now, he's done a good one this week. 8-track boombox. And if you like disassembly videos and reassembly videos, you will enjoy that one. It was well worth watching, I thought. And it had a happy ending, which you might, if you watch it, you'll understand. Moving on, Recordology has done one on the Crosley Nomad again. And I reckon he must have a faulty deck there, because he reckons it sounds okay, but it's very quiet. But again, I won't spoil the thread of the video. Because this is Nomad after a year. And Cassette Comeback's done an Australian Philips tape, which he reckoned was very good. And that was a Philips Maxichrome or something. I didn't write down what it was, but all we know is that he did what he does, and he said it sounds all right. It biased in okay, which leads me on. There's a segue there. This is where it almost sounds professional. Stephen might understand that. Stephen says, never seen an 8-track here. I wonder if they were even sold. I don't know. In the UK, they did sell them. They were fairly popular in the 1974, 75. And that was in the days when you could buy a stereo system from Woolworths for about 25 quid. But that was, in our case, me and my mate, that was about 2.5 weeks' wages. And that meant that we had to, we wouldn't be able to give our parents the housekeeping. So it gives you an idea of what. And that was a Rigonda stereo system, a Russian one, which is basically a turntable and amplifier. God awful speakers, but he tried buying one. He ended up, there was an interesting thing, he ended up buying an 8-track. This is what reminded me. He went to the local car spares shop, and they were selling, now it was the name of a racing driver, Harry somebody or other. And they were selling, it was a popular brand, 8-track player and speakers, and it worked out at about 15 quid for an 8-track player and speakers. So he bought that. And very shortly he found out why 8-tracks weren't very popular over here. For the simple reason that heads, there isn't heads, it's a singular head. But he started having problem with well, you'd sort of call it azimuth, but it wasn't. It was actually the head started misaligning. It didn't click from one track to the other very well, and so you started getting two tracks at the same time playing. So that was a bit awkward. But I always remember he had a Monty Python. He had a Monty Python 8-track cartridge, and nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition was the favourite line from it. Could never stand watching Monty Python, but I tell you what, their tapes and things they worked as far as I was concerned. Steve says, never seen Betamax either though. Oh no, that's strange. How old are you, Stephen? Just as a point of interest, roughly what decade? Kelvin says they were available when I was a child. Didn't sell well. I only saw one in a car. Kelvin's talking about 8 tracks. I'm guessing I'm a bit older than Kelvin as well then. They were popular in cars, but not very. All right, 46. Okay, I've got a son of 42. So yes, you wouldn't really... Betamax was very common in the UK, even into the middle 80s. Rental shops had a choice of both, that's right. So Stephen said we had V2000. Yeah, well, of course, Philips had a big thing in Europe with the V2000. I mean, we had V2000 as well. In fact, I had V2000. I've got one upstairs, the 2022, which is the portable. And I also had a Betamax 3000 portable. Copied all the tapes over to V2000. I'll tell you one of the things that really gutted me about the V2000, and I don't know if it's it or whether there was its picture quality was okay. It was as good as any of the others, and the ability to fast forward and freeze frame and everything was really good. So you could easily skip through because of the dynamic head tracking, which meant you didn't get all the picture rolling and jumping and everything. And it meant that it could play stuff. But they actually had a problem where, for some reason, they started putting a crease in the middle of the tape. As in, by playing the tapes, we ended up with this crease in them. Now, it wasn't due to the head drum as such, because the head drum and the tape transport was all very similar to VHS. But obviously it was a transport problem because the tapes developed this line. And the problem with this line, this crease in the middle, was that's where the head switching happened. And it meant that you ended up with no sync pulses. And so they actually had to put in a retro mod on them to put in a frame sync pulse generator. And I thought that was really bad. I mean, we won't count the fact that Grundig and Philips put the heads at different places, the audio heads, so the sound didn't synchronise. They sorted that out quickly enough. They sort of cut slots in the head mounts and moved them along a bit. But yeah, I mean, they were actually causing the tapes to not crinkle, but have a line in the middle. Tram line is similar effect, but it was only a single line. And yeah, if you had a tape that had been played many times, and bear in mind, video libraries, there were a few that did Video 2000, they would be playing them quite often, and so you'd have this problem. And if you had one of the early machines that didn't have the retro mod fitted for some reason, you would have a tape that you could not get to play. It had the black and white ziggy zaggy, it's actually a dropout compensator, but it had nothing to compensate because it was on the sync thing, so it couldn't lock up, and it was really quite nasty the way it worked. But yeah, if you had one of the later ones, it had the built-in thing, and they put the syncs in themselves. But it's not one that I've seen publicised much. I had a problem where, because at that time I was working for the military. I was working for a company called SKC who supplied all this stuff to the military, and yeah, well, you probably had one of the later ones, Stephen, so you wouldn't have had that problem, but I did. And I had the problem that I took it back to the shop that I bought it from and said, got this problem. They said, "Oh, right, okay," blah, blah, blah. And they tried telling me it was the heads. So they changed the heads. That didn't work. Eventually, they got this mod thing through because I had the Grundig ones. And the thing was, I was actually a video engineer working for a company called SKC, who were the suppliers of video equipment, domestic and semi-professional, to the Army and Navy and Air Force. And if you bought a piece of equipment from the NAFI, then it came through SKC. They supplied it all, and they also did the broadcasting for stuff. It's all quite good. But when you had a good one, you had a good one. Right, Kelvin says, in those days where I was brought up, we couldn't even afford to buy a TV, let alone a VCR, so everything was rented. Sounds like it kept Gary employed for a while. Yes. Well, this is it. Now, if you take my employment, yeah, it was an interesting one. Left school, went into Waitrose as a manager. Didn't want that. That wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be in the post office. Oh, not the posting office, but I wanted to be a BT engineer like my brother was. And circumstances, events changed, moved out to the rural area, and they did their enrolment exams a different time of year. Couldn't do that. Ended up in Waitrose. Ended up then, because that was only a temporary thing, got a job with an electronics company called Trend. I think they're still around. And never looked back, except for that was in computer stuff and peripherals, and our top selling item at the time was a paper tape reader. It used to read punch tape, the unidirectional 800. They're really great. And then went to college, got involved with sort of the video side of stuff there, because that's what the course did. It was electronics mechanics. And so we split halfway through the day into the sort of the computer section went off one direction and the TV section went off the other. Anyway, left that, ended up in doing electronics for Portal Prompt, as it happens. They did prompting, so that was digital and things, and then ended up via car tuning, doing software, writing software, fixing stuff, getting my own shop, having my own Panasonic service department, and various other things. So yeah, at some point, one of you's kept me employed, either by driving a car, operating a computer, or hiring a videotape, or having your telly fixed. So that's why I know an awful lot of not a lot about an awful lot, because I've had to. No point sitting on your backside when you need to stretch, you stretch. Right, so my family bought their first TV in 1958 to see the World Expo in Brussels on it. Oh, right. That was quite early to be buying a TV, although having said that, my dad did it about the same time. The World Expo, so that would have been black and white, and yeah, opening the world to the world, though, that was. Second TV set in the street, I'm told. Yeah, not surprised. And I bet, because most people in the UK who went for TVs went for it for the coronation, 1951, for the Queen. That was apparently a big thing. But we had, my dad bought TVs, but we always had them on not on rental, but we had telly maintenance. And you used to know the telly repairman. He used to come round every 3 months, change a valve, do something. At one point, our set went live. The entire the set, the aerial, everything was live. Anything metal went live because the chassis was a live chassis, which is normal on TVs. But the aerial connector went short circuit because it's a couple of high voltage capacitors, and one of them decided to become a wire. Strange. Yeah, half the street came to watch. I'm not surprised. The other half went to the other house. There you go. I rented one of those VHS machines back in the day. It cost a fortune every month. Yeah. But you say that, but I mean, just as a point of it, whilst we're reminiscing, I had a shop in 1983, 84, and I was repairing Sharp video recorders, Sony, and all the rest of the stuff. And it was interesting, you know. This sort of goes upon some of the problem with YouTube. I used to put an advert in the local paper, and I used to say repair video recorders, all makes, types, etc. And that didn't work. So then I used to put in repair video recorders, Betamax, VHS. And so somebody would phone up and say, do you repair VHS? So yeah. And then they'd phone up, somebody else would phone up and say, do you repair Betamax? Say yes. Say, I've got a Sony, can you repair that? Yes. And then I started listing the advert was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because you couldn't just say I repair video recorders. You had to start almost listing the models, which is always a problem. Right, so Steve says, yes, the electric wasn't very stable, so the repairman was a friend of our house. Yeah. Our first VHS was a Sharp before the V2000 even. Yeah, the obviously VHS came out in 1978 with the first ones. U-matic came out in 1973, which was the first domestic ones. I remember seeing those. They were gorgeous machines in a huge thing. But if you ever, I tell you what, I mean, we're all geeks on here, aren't we, in one way or another. If you ever see one of those old video recorders, the old Betamax or the original, no, not the original VHSs, but the original Betamaxes and things, if you take the bottom off and have a look, the original Betamax, they had basically a washing machine motor in them that had a brake around. This was for spinning the heads up, the main drum, and they had a brake which was an electromagnet around the shaft, and the way they used to control the speed was you had the feedback servo and things. They used to apply current to the brake coils, which would control the speed of rotation, rather than trying to actually drive the motor. The motor was synchronized. It was an AC motor, I believe, so it was synchronized at 50 hertz. But they then sort of allowed it to go faster and slower by slowing it down, speeding it up using this system. But it was basically locked to the mains, which is why you had problems when they started altering the mains frequencies. But that's very much like the original cassette decks and things. So that was the original U-matics and the Betamax. I think the first VHSs had actually proper electronic servos in them, but that's probably because proper motors. But you may have noticed that as they got older or younger, whichever way you look at it, as time went on, they got less and less, fewer and fewer belts, and they got more and more direct drive motors, because the electronics to control them was coming down. It was all down to money. But it didn't mean that they were making it cheap. They were actually they would have liked to have had the control in the first place, but they couldn't afford it. And then, which is sort of inverse to what people on the forums say, it was all profit, and they cheapened it down, they took away this, that and the other. It wasn't really, it was the other way around. They wanted to be able to do it properly, and so they did. Unfortunately, it's not as reliable, you can't keep it going so long. Once your direct drive mechanism is broken, it's broken. Whereas a belt could snap and you could just stick another one on. It's just one of those things. Right. Stephen, Stephen and I have been doing a little bit of correspondence, and he's sent me some interesting stuff which will be coming up on a video soon. That's I just thought I'd say that there's some interesting results that he's been playing about with. He's got some rather nice equipment, and he's been doing a bit of research for me, because I haven't been able to do what he's been able to do. So there will be a video coming up in the not too distant future featuring his results, which should be one to watch. So I should have at least one viewer, won't I, Stephen? Right. Anything else? We've been going for 50 minutes now. And anything anybody like to bring up or discuss? The clock's over there, by the way. just so you know. Oh look, you never what? I've just had, literally just this second, had the notification saying that I'm live. So I'm glad about that. It's only 50 minutes in. Oh yeah, I was saying, the first video recorder I ever sold was a Sharp VHS, and I sold it for 500 quid. It was second hand. It was a £700 machine. The guy brought it in and traded it for something, and so I had to refurbish it, which meant change belts and things. I think I put on a new head drum, and I sold that for 500 quid. Now, that was a lot of money in 1985, and I know that it was. I closed my shop in 1990, so I know that it was between those 2 points. And when I closed my shop, you could buy an Amstrad video recorder for about 300 quid. And I sold them. But I used to actually ask the question on my rental, because I did film rentals as well. I used to ask the question, what video recorder do you have? Because if they came back and said Hinari or Amstrad or any of the Dixon's own brand stuff, Seisho and all that sort of thing, then we used to scrutinise the tapes because they used to have problems. The pinch rollers used to fail very regularly, which meant that you would end up with wrinkles on the bottom of the tape, or you'd end up with the whole tape being sort of like concertinaed, or it would just chew the thing up. And the other thing was that the take-up spools used to just give up. Now, that was only a 5-minute job on some machines, and it was an hour and a half on a Fisher. None of the Fishers that I ever put out were exactly the same as when they came in, because in order to replace the take-up idler drive, you had to take all the tape mechanism out, and you had to disconnect great wadger leads. And you then popped off this little thing, which was basically a plastic wheel with a spring on it and a rubber ring. And you pop that off, pop the new one on. So that's how long it took. Pop, job done. He said it wasn't, because you now had to put it all back together again. And so you had to reconnect all these leads, and I'm talking about lots. And you had to put all the mechanism in, and then you had to test it. It still took the tapes in and all that sort of thing. So on that machine, it was literally an hour and a half to take it apart, change the thing, put it back together again. On a Hitachi VT11, which had a very similar mechanism, it was 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes. Well, after the first one, and Sony's were 15 minutes. But the Fishers, what they did was they had underneath the chassis, that if you turned the thing on its back and looked, you could see where this idler was. But they had a sort of like an X-frame chassis, sort of plastic cutaway thing, so you could get to some things, but you couldn't actually get to the flipping idler. And so what we ended up doing in the workshop I was working in was we just cut a little bit of the plastic away from this X-frame. Did absolutely no harm at all. It took you 10 minutes to cut the plastic away using something like a Dremel, or more often than not, a hot soldering iron. Literally, you had to push away about 6 or 7 millimeters of plastic, just so you could get to where the thing was attached. And then you could pop it off. You go, it was off. And then pop the new one on and put it back together again. So instead of taking an hour and a half and doing the job properly, it took half an hour and you'd done the job satisfactorily. All the new parts were in the right places. All the functionality was there, and unless you were going to start standing your Fisher video recorder on its left-hand corner and swinging on it, and doing some sort of circus act, never ever would there be a problem with there being any structural loss. But it was just one of those things where the designers obviously didn't like the service engineers. Steve says, I still can't get my head around one of your videos where you play the same tape and recording in 3 machines. Right, I will explain that one, because that's what I did. Right, it was a metal tape, and so what I did was I recorded the metal tape on a machine, and it sounded good. In fact, I happen to have the box with the rest of the metal tapes in here. So it was a metal tape, just like that. And what I did was I recorded that in a metal capable machine, and I then played it back in 3 machines, which were the one it was originally recorded on, the W1200, and I believe the Ion. And the point was that the time constant for metal is the same as Type 2. So when you buy a W1200, for instance, it says playback suitable for all tapes, recording capable of Type 1 and Type 2. So it hasn't got the 250% bias drive that you'd need to be able to record on a metal tape. But it's quite happy to play it back, because the signal's the signal, and it doesn't know any different. But I thought it was interesting because the W1200 is as you know, if you've watched my videos, you know it gives reasonable results. Never going to claim that it's a Dragon or a Dragon killer, but you know, it managed to do a slightly better job with the Tudor tape than the Dragon did. Yeah. Right. Okay. So the two. Right. You're on about that one. That you've changed your mind. Right. Well, we'll get onto that one then. That's sort of a bit of a good segue there. Right. So on the 3 machines, it was just playing back and just seeing how one tape and 3 machines can sound different. With the Dragon one, yeah, Kelvin recorded the Dragon tape, and he sent me the results played back on his Dragon, which I used. But then he sent me the tape, which I also used, but I played that back in the W1200 so that I could actually get the signals off it. So that was only a Type 2 tape. Well, no, Type 1 tape, but it was such an awful tape. And we wanted to see, Kelvin and I wanted to see whether the Dragon could do any better. This goes back to the problem that we have with some of the other YouTube reviews, where they say, if I put this tape in and I twiddle the knobs here, you can get this really good sound. Well, what if you haven't got the knobs? If you haven't got the knobs, like I haven't got the knobs on the W1200, yeah, then what can you do with it? And so the thing was, Kelvin said, I'll have a go. I'll buy one, and we'll see if it's any good. See if the one you've got's just a one-off. Well, it turned out it wasn't, because the one that Kelvin sourced was equally as bad. In fact, it was equally as bad. It wasn't even sort of as bad. I mean, obviously the quality control at the Tudor plant must have been excellent, because they were all as bad. They were all as bad as each other. So, playing back, seeing what the 1200 could do with the tape gave you one set of results. Seeing what the Dragon could do with the tape gave you another set of results. And then I thought I'd try playing the Dragon tape in the 1200 to see if it was a recording problem, as in the 1200 couldn't record the tape properly, or whether it was the tape was inherently bad. Now, so Kelvin's machine, being a Dragon, it did the best to that tape that it could. But actually, and I don't think Kelvin will argue with this, the tape was just so rubbish that the Dragon couldn't make it sound good. The 1200 didn't actually sound any worse than the Dragon, because the results were so awful anyway, which proves that just whacking a tape in a machine, twiddling the knobs and saying, oh yeah, it biases up okay, and that sounds okay, isn't actually a particularly good way of testing a tape. You need to actually know what you're getting and why. Do you remember last week's live? I think Michelle came on and I was saying about figures and things. She said she didn't like figures. Now, I'm not having a go because figures can be boring. But if you've got, for instance, two cars and you say, well, mine's faster than yours. No, mine's faster than yours. No, mine's quicker, blah, blah, blah. Well, you take them down to Santa Pod, you put them on the drag strip and you send them down the line. And the one that crosses the quarter-mile track light is the one that's the winner. So that was obviously the one that was faster at that point because, got there quicker. That's figures. So that takes away all the arguing. Now, I mean, you might end up with saying, yeah, but mine, all right, the acceleration wasn't so good, but it'll do 250 mile an hour and yours will stop at 190. Well, that may also be true, but the figures, again, in order to make that argument, you've got to have figures. So that's the way I tend to think. So when Kelvin said that he'd try the tape out and it wasn't particularly very good, my immediate thought was, right, okay, well, let's see what a Dragon recorded tape sounds like in a W1200. And the answer is it sounded as shit as a W1200 recorded tape in a W1200. So it was interesting. Now, there is an interesting thing. I get the feeling the W1200 is very forgiving with harmonics, says Stephen. It does go up high, but obviously it's not a high-end deck. But are harmonics actually something that you have to reproduce, or do they just happen in the wires? Answers on a postcard or in the comments. Now that really is quite an interesting question, because one of my videos where I've got where I'm trying to explain about odd harmonic distortion and whatever, I've literally put two signals together and you get a third one. Well, where did that third one come from? And if that third one has miraculously appeared, as it has, from two electronic signals beating together, the harmonic is produced where? Is it produced in the recording, or is it produced in the playing back of the recording, or is it produced on the listening? I raised the question. I don't know the answer, but if anybody can give me a proper rundown on that, or some thoughts, that'd be great, because I'm thinking my ears stop at about 10k now, and so if I listen to if it's the case of if you mix two signals together you get a third, which I know is true. If I mix a 10k signal and a 2k signal, an 8k signal, I should get a plus 2k and a minus 2k. And we've seen that happen on various things, so we know that's true. So will I hear a 12 kilohertz tone, which I can't actually hear, because if it was just generated pure, I wouldn't hear it. But if it's part of the mix, will my ears put in the harmonic as it travels down my audionic nerve? There's a question for you. Any biologists, doctors, audiologists who can come up with an answer to that? It would answer a question. I mean, PS Audio was asking, or was saying, one of the best sound mixers he knew was well into his 60s and was doing he did some sort of sound test and he couldn't hear much above 8k, but he was still one of the best sound mixers in the business. Well, how does that work when you're mixing sounds that go well up to the high frequencies? Sorry, Kelvin. Yeah. So Stephen says, I suspect both can happen, but on the Tudor tape video in the wires, yes. Funnily enough, the playback on the Dragon, the harmonics were more of a problem. So I'm guessing that the electronics was allowing that to happen. But yeah, it's one of those things. So there's a point where a machine that wasn't quite as good would actually be slightly less uncomfortable to listen to. because the input was so shit. Shouldn't really say that, should I? Shouldn't say shit. Should say shite. Kelvin says, damn, I'm supposed to take a blood pressure reading before bed, and now the tutor has put me over hypertension just remembering it. Yeah, it has that effect on me as well. I haven't got to think whale song, Kelvin. Stephen says, maybe we can find some common tapes between us and compare how different machines generate harmonics on the same tape. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've found slightly confusing, and I've tended to not particularly highlight it, but if one of the last ones has got a step at the minus 20 recordings, but it hasn't got such a big step at the 0 dB, whereas other recordings we've got a step at 0 dB and we haven't got the step at minus 20. But if you go for only one channel, they're not there, so it must be some sort of phase thing. Steve says, I'm sure the W1200 generates the least. Probably does. One of the things I was very impressed about was the because Kelvin's got a W1200 as well. One of the things I was quite impressed about with the Ion was how good that is at getting high frequencies. You know, it's a really cheap and cheerful mechanism. Well, it's apparently based on Sony, but the electronics on it are very, how should I put this? Well, simplistic. There's no, if it's not needed, it's not there, sort of thing. But it will go up to 20k quite happily if you run it at double speed. In fact, if you think about it, it's a dubbing deck. It has to be able to do 20k. In fact, it has to be able to do about 40k. I didn't have the ability to measure more than about 22k, but I was doing the test I was doing wasn't for high frequency, it was for quality, and the actual quality was very good on double speed. So if you ever get an Ion or Marantz or one of those really weird double decks that are about $100, £100, depends where you buy them from. If you get a good one, they're not that bad. I mean, they have potential, I think would be a way of describing it. But yeah, strange. It's an idea, Steve. Maybe we can try and work something around that. Any other questions? Any other videos that weren't understood? Did you understand the one about the three tapes? They should have all sounded the same because it's the same tape used in the three machines, but they all had their own sound. So that was interesting. Kelvin, this idea of making things overcomplicated. What would you use as a reference deck? Yeah. Okay, we'll scrap that one then, Kelvin. It would be a problem, I guess. So yeah. For playback. Well, we could always use my one as a reference, but that's no good because it's only my house. The recording deck, I suppose. Yeah, well, the thing is, the stuff that Kelvin, the stuff that Kelvin sent me was available because what I did when I played it back, it didn't matter how it was recorded per se. I played it back so that it went in with the 0 dB signal was at 0 dB, and so all references were taken from there. Obviously, you can't do that and say, well, because if a tape was recorded low, it wouldn't be the same as on another deck. But for the purposes of getting the signal noise ratios and things, it doesn't really matter because it's the highs, it's the gap. I did a couple of, before I started saying things like this, I did some tests, and if you've got a 25 dB signal noise ratio, it doesn't matter how big the signal is when you finish with it, the difference between the noise and the signal will be 25 dB. It doesn't. That's one of those things that people don't understand remains constant. And if anybody's had any other experiences, then please put it in the comments. But I did actually do some testing where I recorded something on it digitally, very low level, and it had the same signal noise ratio when I upped it and put it up to be full level as it did before. There was 25 dB between the signal and the noise, which is interesting to say the least. Steve says, hang on, Eggle says, this radio from the 50s is brilliant, sounds fantastic, and it can be used as an amplifier for microphones and most probably electric guitar as well. Aha, so that'd be a dynamic microphone input. And yes, it would work for guitar. If you're going to do that, just be careful that you don't blow your... Is it a single speaker? If you've got tweeters, they used to very often have problems with people plugging guitars into hi-fi amps because they'd pluck the string and they'd do the thing that they did in Back to the Future where he blew the cone out because they balance the power between the tweeters and the woofers, and if you have one that's not been designed particularly well, you pluck the wrong string and the speaker goes pop. So just be careful. It's like the old thing about valve amplifiers. If you don't connect speakers to them, they can run away and destroy the triodes, the drivers, which is never a good thing. You don't want your valves melting, particularly nowadays when they're not that easy to get hold of. I mean, they are relatively easy, but they're expensive. Right. Anything else anybody wants to talk about? We're looking to sort of wind it up now, if required. If not, there you go. Biamp, 2 amplifiers, 1 for tweeters and the other for middle and bass. Yes, that gets around it, and that's a good way of doing it. If you do these things properly, then you can make these things virtually bulletproof. Always used to annoy me when you go to cinema and you'd be sat there listening to something, and it would turn out that one of the speakers, that the ambient speakers around by where you were, was the one that they'd got wrong and had managed to blow up or something, and so it was rattling. Always hated that. But now what was that? We were doing a thing, a conch tube. No, what was that? We were trying to do that standing wave tube thing.
Oh, yes, I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. If there's an interesting thing, we had a couple of car speakers which were supposedly, I mean, it was not a problem, but had some quite expensive.
Cont tube.
Yeah, cont tube. You have to say it carefully. And what you do is you put some basically granules, polystyrene balls into a tube, and you put a speaker at one end, and you then power up the speaker, and you get standing waves. And it's a bit like the things you do with magnets and iron filings. Well, we were trying. My wife was wanting it was a project for her because she was teaching science at the time, and it was a project. Kelvin says hello.
Hello, Kelvin.
Louise says hello. So we put this speaker, which was supposedly rated at 15 or 20 watt car speaker. It was a Harry Moss. That was the name of it. I was trying to remember the other day. Harry Moss speaker, never been used. It sat in the porch for 15 years. So I said, right, well, we'll use this then. And we had this Aiwa stereo system, which was rated about 30 watts per channel. And Eggle says hello. She says hello. So we had this thing, and it was rated at 15, 20 watts. And trying to get this trying to get this tube to work. Cont tube. No you. Trying to get this thing to work. It was great. You could see all this stuff shimmering as I would turn the power up. It was shimmering more. Turned it up a bit more. It was shimmering more, and then went. Kelvin says, "Bring her on. I've only seen her feet."
I'm trying to find the thing what it's actually called.
And so we
yes, KUNDT.
KUNDT. Kund tube. And it was really, Eggle says, beautiful feet, I gather. And it was really it really worked well. It did start to work, and then the speaker went fut, and it didn't make very much noise at all after that. Smoked a bit, and all went rather stiff, and so at least we had a successful thing. But I made sure that when you took it in to demonstrate it, it was never that bad again. Yeah, there is actually a video of my wife on my channel. She's doing the microphone testing. She sings a lot, and so she was singing into a microphone that we tested. Bought it, thought we'd do a test on it, and put a video up, and did.
I could be.
You can stick your head in. Oh, look, there you go.
Hello.
Yep, there we go. They'll see you.
I'm
There
forever
you
on
are.
your videos now.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry.
Kelvin says, I've only seen the Royal Mail delivery photo.
My pink socks.
I will divulge no more. Eggle says, say no more, Kelvin. And Kelvin says, yay! Right, yes. Right, Eggle, the better part of Mr. G. Yes. You're my better half, aren't you?
Well, I think you're my better half, actually.
Yes, well, we're a partnership. We both have better halves. We complement each other. Right, okay then. Yeah, so cunt tubes are interesting, well worth playing with. Make sure that when it says what the wattage is, and you're putting a single tone through, that the wattage is what it means RMS, and don't use an expensive speaker, because I now only have one car speaker, but it's all right. I knew it was a risk, and actually I was quite happy to do it, but it just illustrates the point that what they say and what they do isn't always the same thing. And a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. As we find out, I'll keep on going onto these forums and things and seeing people saying, oh, let's do this. There was one last week. A guy said, I've got my rewind doesn't work properly. It screeches and screams. So I saw on somewhere the recommendation to use sewing machine oil on the capstan bearing. It had no effect. To which I put a thing on and said, no, why would you think that it would be the capstan bearing? But, try having a look at this and this. And it's just little knowledge is a dangerous thing. That's why I have this thing against WD-40, because there are people who quite happily spray WD-40 inside a cassette deck and then wonder why it doesn't work. And then why 6 months later it falls apart. But there you go. It's one of those things. Right. Okay. Anything else? Egil, you got anything else to say? Stephen? Calvin? Well, if that's what we've got, then I shall wind it up and say thank you very much for coming, guys. I've got some stuff in the pipeline which may or may not be of interest. A little bit more of the same, but obviously different, because different products. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys next week. So thank you, Stephen. Good night. Thank you, Egil. Good night. And thank you, Kelvin. Good night. And as I say, maybe you can catch your video in the meantime, and maybe you can get some people to come and watch. You never know. Anyway, see you next week. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye. Louise says goodbye as well.